With President Trump's legal woes and yet another threat to the Justice Department, he's upset that it could be withholding information from Republican lawmakers. Here, of course, is his tweet. A rigged system. They don't want to turn over documents to Congress. What are they afraid of? Why so much redacting? Why such unequal justice? At some point, I will have no choice but to use the powers granted to the presidency and get involved. And he put an exclamation point just to drive the point home. And we have yet another shakeup in the president's legal team. Ty Cobb, he's out. Just announced today that he will stay till the end of the month. That is the second high-level defection in just the past couple months. He's following John Dowd, who also stepped down after Trump promised that both would be there for a long time. Instead, Trump will reportedly hire Emmett Flood to replace Cobb. Flood, he represented Bill Clinton during his impeachment, and he will join this man, Jay Sekulow, who is now facing some questions of his own. There is growing speculation that it was he, and again, he's Trump's attorney, who leaked the Mueller questions to the press. Since the president hates leakers, it will be very interesting to see how this all plays out if, in fact, it ever gets proven. Now, the Times, they just published 49 questions that it says Mueller wants to ask the president, and they're broken into 4 categories. Questions related to Michael Flynn, he, the former national security advisor. Questions related to fired FBI Director James Comey. Questions about Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who's recused himself and that's made Trump livid. And also questions, of course, about Trump, his campaign coordination with Russia, and more. Well, joining us now to help us sort this out, good luck with that, is former federal prosecutor and good friend to the program, Dan Goldman. Dan, I appreciate always the time. A lot to get to, so let me just jump right in the deep end. When you saw the 49 questions, or really more topics because obviously they'd be follow questions and all the rest, most of them seem to be what we'd expect, with a few exceptions, I thought at least, that seemed to be pretty specific. He talked about the dossier in there. He also asked about those Russia-friendly changes to the GOP platform at their convention in Cleveland before the election, and obviously more. What, if anything, jumped out about what was in there and what wasn't?
Well, what jumped out at me in particular was the question directly related to Paul Manafort soliciting help from Russians during the campaign. And you know, Richard, very well that Rick Gates decided to cooperate a couple months ago, and Gates was Paul Manafort's right-hand man. So you have to assume that Gates and Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos have already given Mueller all of the information, all of the knowledge that they have. Together, they can really paint a very clear picture as to what happened during the campaign and what interactions the campaign had with Russia. So you're right to be clued into the platform change at the RNC, which there's been reporting about that was something that Paul Manafort was very interested in. The fact that the question relates directly to Manafort's outreach to Russia, Jared Kushner's back channel to Russia during the campaign and the transition, but it does start to give us a little bit of a flavor as to what Mueller is looking at in connection to the collusion. On the obstruction side, which is really the rest of it, the obstruction really relates almost exclusively to Donald Trump. So you have to assume that that is the vast majority of the universe of questions that are not a surprise to us that he would be asked.
It sounds like a silly question, but why Mueller doing this? Is this fact-finding, or is this really more, especially given the penchant of Donald Trump, as a game of gotcha? That they will be, just as he's already secured 3 indictments against guys who basically perjured themselves here, that, you know, he already knows more than the person in front of him, or certainly knows a lot more than maybe, in this case, the president will think he knows in his probe. Is he trying to trip him up, or is he trying to learn something?
Well, I'm very suspicious that Mueller actually provided these questions to Trump and to Trump's legal team. I would be very surprised if he laid it out in this much detail, but I suspect that he has provided topics and that perhaps Trump's lawyers have distilled these questions. You can query why they're leaking it, and it almost certainly is coming from Trump's end. I think Mueller is trying to do everything he can to do this properly, to accede to some of the president's concerns, and to get an interview with him, because even if he's not charged, it's critical to have the president's story on this for any report that may go to Congress or otherwise.
Well, I guess the concern is, given the president's penchant for lying, he might walk right into these things, especially if he makes the mistake of, and it seems that we even learned this in Manafort when he tried to get his case dismissed, the voluminous reasonings, rationales, and evidence laid out as to why seemingly Mueller's building these bulletproof cases. It would be at his own peril if he didn't tell the truth.
You have to assume that Mueller has some evidence, if not full knowledge, of the answers to every single one of those questions. But Mueller's not trying to trap the president. A prosecutor goes into every interview advising the witness that they must tell the truth, that it's a crime not to tell the truth, and expecting that witness to tell the truth. So if Donald Trump goes in and tells the truth, whatever happens will happen. Mueller will compare it to what other evidence he has, and then he'll have to either write a report as it relates to Trump himself or perhaps charge him. I think that's unlikely, but perhaps charge other people based on some of the comments and statements that Trump made.
We've heard the reports that reportedly Mueller opined about the possibility of subpoenaing the president, obviously something Mr. Dowd wasn't too crazy about. How would that work here, and do you think that's plausible that we could see that happen?
I absolutely think that's plausible. I think that it is preferential for both sides if there is going to be an interview, and if Trump is going to agree to an interview, that it would be voluntary. What would happen if Trump doesn't agree to testify, or doesn't agree to meet with Mueller, rather, and Mueller wants to get his testimony or wants to get him on record as to what he's going to say, he would issue a grand jury subpoena for his testimony. So Trump can challenge it, and he likely will. He would move to quash the subpoena, and then it would be a litigation that would go through the court system, ultimately to the Supreme Court. The
Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's in charge, obviously, of the Russia probe, and now it turns out he's also the target of the Freedom Caucus and their members who want to impeach him. Now, the president has also been blasting Rosenstein for months. With all these threats and the looming promise of an impeachment, at least from a certain wing within the Republican Party on the Hill, take a listen to Rosenstein's response.
Yeah, there have been people who have been making threats privately and publicly against me for quite some time, and I think they should understand by now the Department of Justice is not going to be extorted. We're going to do what's required by the rule of law, and any kind of threats that anybody makes are not going to affect the way we do our job.
Extortion, and just as a point of clarity here, Rosenstein was not always the boogeyman for the GOP. As a reminder, I just want the audience to take a listen to a little recent history.
Rosenstein has earned so much bipartisan support to serve as the Deputy AG that the Judiciary Committee reported out his nomination with all but one member.
Mr. Rosenstein, you have served in the Department of Justice for a couple of decades now, and you've developed a distinguished career marked by integrity and fairness.
Rod Rosenstein, who everybody across the board has unequivocally said this guy is a man of upstanding character and essentially the gold standard at the Department of Justice.
He is a man of extraordinary independence and integrity and a reputation in both political parties of great character.
Okay, so you go pretty quickly nowadays from being the gold standard to being out of control here, and guys talking about impeachment. In all seriousness, though, are you shocked? I mean, I know we shouldn't be shocked anymore, but where we've gotten in 2018, where you can politicize, and basically, as the president did in a tweet today, doubling down with the Freedom Caucus, that basically the whole Justice Department is corrupt from the neck down. That's a pretty scary sentiment that's where we are in our politics today.
We're at somewhat of a crisis point in how we are going to view the Department of Justice. Since Nixon, the Department of Justice has been an independent arm of the executive branch. And Trump's threats continue to demonstrate that he does not view it that way, that he views the Department of Justice as the equivalent of the General Counsel's office in the Trump organization, and that it is his Department of Justice, it is not the people's Department of Justice. And that's a very scary, scary sentiment. And Rod Rosenstein yesterday made the strongest statement in support of the independence and the rule of law for the Department of Justice. I was very happy to hear him say that and say it so emphatically.
Dan, my friend, thank you. I always appreciate the time.
Richard, it's my pleasure. Great to talk to you.
All right, everybody, we're going to stay on this subject, but dig deeper with our legal panel here into this Russia probe, turmoil in Trump's legal team, and the ongoing saga of Michael Cohen, his personal attorney. And I'll ask my panel, if they had Trump as a client, what would worry them most? We'll be right back.